Welcome to the EZCODE Projects Series Maze video number 5. If you have not done so already, please complete the previous EZCODE Projects Maze series videos. For those of you that have done so, let's begin. In the last video, we cleaned up our code base and changed how our rows were created. In this video, we'll continue with the logic to add random intervals. Remember, just type as I do. Pause the video or slow down the speed when needed so that your code matches what I have on the screen. Understanding comes later. Let's begin. Open the Maze project directory in VS Code. I'm going to open up VS Code, open the Explorer pane, open folder. I keep my project under Projects, EZCODE Maze. That's the one we want to open. Okay. And open the code.js file to the right. All right, there we have it. Now let's review the maze algorithm again. So I'm just going to go to Google Chrome. I already have it open. If you want to view it, this is the URL. And as we're going down here, the really good part of this is the sample run really breaks down what we're doing. Again, the first row, this will just be an empty row, and then it says, okay, unique values. We've already done that in the last video. Create right walls. So step 3, this is where we're at. We want to create right walls. So if we choose, let's see, it's comparing the first and second items or columns in the row. You can see this is one row. This is an array of the columns. If we choose not to add a wall, union the sets. So it's talking about, if you remember the set number from before, our set number is 2 numbers, the row index and the column index, which gives it a unique value. And it's saying to make them the same if we choose not to add a wall. So in this case, we're going to say, and it's showing right here, it said 1 and 2. It said we're randomly, are we going to add a wall? So our logic would say yes or no. In this case, in their example, it said no. And so it says union the sets. So this 2 becomes a 1. So they become part of the same set. And then it looked like it did it again. It said no, and it kept the set numbers being the same as it's going. Here it said, yes, we're going to add a wall. So then it said, okay, well then don't change this one. And so on and so on and so on. So as we're going through here, there's one other aspect of this as well, and it's up here on creating right walls, and it says randomly decide to add a wall or not. If the current cell and the cell to the right are members of the same set, always create a wall between them. Now this would only occur on the second row and every row after that. The first row is always going to be unique members beginning, so we don't have to worry about that. We are going to go over this here, but the first row doesn't matter. If you decide not to add a wall, then union the sets. This is what we just talked about. And we're going to actually do both of these items, and we'll see how those are applied here in a second. So let's get back to the code.js file. So I'm just going to close this out for now, and we're back at the code.js file. Now, we need a way to randomize when to add a right wall. So to do this, let's create a helper function that will do it for us. So we're just going to go below the create row. So I'm just going to highlight the curly brace here, follow the line down. We'll give an extra space here between them, and we're going to create a new function. So again, we're going to say function. We're going to say randomize. And then we're just going to pass in an array to our function. New line there, curly braces, open them up. There's our function, and we're just going to return something here. So just type along, and we're going to go over what this does here in the browser. So we're just going to return, and we're talking to the array we're passing in there. And once again, to get an array or an index of the array, you put array brackets after that, and then you just need the index number. Well, we have to randomly decide what that's going to be. So in these brackets, we're talking about this array, and we're going to use some JavaScript libraries here. We have math floor, So that's a function. We're going to open some parentheses here, and we're going to say math random, and then we're going to say times. So the asterisk is the times symbol, and we're going to say array length. And then once again, we're going to go over this just now, put a semicolon on it, and this is a very simple little function that is super powerful. And you'll see we'll use it several times in this code base, and if you can remember to do this, you'll use it often. So let's go to the browser and we'll examine what's going on here. So I'm just going to, let's see, we'll just take this part of it, but we're going to retype it here in the browser. So I'm going to save our work, although we're not going to refresh this in the browser, and we're going to go right to the browser. We don't need to load the view HTML file. We're just going to open up the developer console, and this is a great way to test little bits of code that you're using. So here it doesn't know what an array is, so we're just going to say, we're going to make one, and we're going to say array equals, and when I'm in the browser console, I rarely ever use const or let to declare variables. We can just get away with declaring them here, and the reason for that is once you declare a constant, you can't, and you're testing around here, you can't redefine it. So we'll just say array, and we're going to equal a simple array. We're just going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, now we have an array, and the first bit of this, if you remember, let's just start on the right side. So it said array.length, and we know that gives out, there's 5 elements in here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so once again, the indexes of these are different. So this would be index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3, index 4. It's not talking about the actual items in the array. The index is talking about the position the elements have. So once again, that gets super confusing. But array length, it's 5. This thing has 5 things in it. The array doesn't know that they're numbers. They just say, hey, I got 5 things in me. And so we know what that is. So what's the thing that we're timesing it? And that is math random. And math random is just a function we can use to get a random bit of numbers. It's 0 point a bunch of numbers. And so we're going to up arrow to bring that back, and I'm going to put the asterisks in there, and I'm going to say array.length. And what happens here? Now that's interesting. So it's 4.8. All right, let's do it again. 1.4. And here in a second, we've got another 1. We've got a 0.2. Let's just get a bunch of numbers on here. So now we're going to use something called math floor. So because we're passing what we just typed, this entire thing, into the math floor function. So what does math floor do? Well, let's go in there and say math random, because that's kind of what we're doing, although that's a function. There we go. And what's it doing? It said math floor math random. So it's just going 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. That's not going to do, because it's going to give us the index of 0 every time. So again, math random, let's get that out there. It's always 0 point something. So this is why we're timesing it by the array length, because now we have a number that says, hey, it's got to be, 5, 4, 3, 2. It's got to be that point something. So that's the first piece we're getting, is these numbers that have, really, we're just looking at the far left number. So we know math floor of 0, the floor, the last number of 0.2222, it's going to take the left side of the decimal. That's what math floor is going to do for us. And it's going to say, okay, well, what is that? Well, once we times it by array length, we're going to get either 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. So we can get as high as, like you can see here, 4.8. And what's the floor of that? It's going to take 4.8. Don't worry about understanding this here, but we can say 4.8. We can always put numbers in here. The floor of that, the lowest part of that, rounding down, is 4. So now we're isolated between 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 indexes. So that's all that thing's doing, is just saying, hey, give us a, random number, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 indexes. So that's all that thing's doing, is just saying, hey, give us a random number, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 indexes. So that's all that's thing's doing, is just saying, hey, give us a random number, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 indexes. So that's all that's thing's doing, is just saying, hey, give us a And when you give us that number, take the floor of it, take the left side of the decimal number of it, which can be, you can see up here, 1, 3, 0, 1, 4. It's going to be one of these indexes because it's limited to the array length. And we're always going to take the lower part of it, which means we're not going to round up. So we're not going to get an index 5, which doesn't exist on this array. There's only 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it's going to give us back an element of this. So if we ran the entire thing and said array brackets, and we're going to put in the code we did before, so for floor, and we have the math floor, math random. Again, we're just sandwiching these things in here times array.length. And where are we at here? And so we have 3. Great. 4. So it's a bit confusing because it looks like we're returning the index numbers, but we're not. We're returning, and here again, see, I'm going to just give array something else here now. Let's just give it letters in a string format. We could have an array of an alphabet if you needed to randomly select. Let's just go out of here and say that. And you wanted to randomly select letters. So this random function gives us an A, gives us an E, gives us a D, gives us another D, E, H, random enough for what we want to do. In our case, we're going to do array equals true or false. And in that case, we can say false, true. Oops, false, false, true. There it goes. And now we have a way to choose if we're going to put a wall in there or not, or anything randomly. Any array we pass into our function, it's going to randomly select an element inside of it. So now that we've examined this, we can return to the code.js file. I'm just going to close this down. Go back to the code.js file here. Okay, so now we have a randomized function. We know what that's doing to select the items. We're not going to use it just yet. Let's now iterate over the row. So in the last video, we were up here and we did the create row function. So now we have, after the first loop, this becomes the first row. Now we need to do something to the row because now we have the ability to look ahead and see what the set number is because we've already generated the array that holds these things. So we need to break into the array that we're given back from the create row, and we're just going to do that with a simple for each function. So the difference between a for each and a dot map is we're going to pass in, of course, a function, and that function is going to have the same items, the item of the array, the index of the item, and the array. Same thing is going to be for each, except for each doesn't return anything. So the map returned here, so it actually returns something, which goes inside of a new array, and that becomes maze. For each, we just need to go over it and do some work. So we're going to pass in an arrow function here, and the first item of the row array is a column, and we're going to call it column index and column array. Same things, same rules apply again. If we got rid of column, then column index would be the column item and column array would be the index. So we need all three. And then right to the right of the parentheses of this, we're going to do our arrow function, enter, curly braces, open them up, and then don't forget a semicolon down here. And then I'm just going to enter to clean this up, keep our code nice and tidy. And now we're inside of the for each function of the row. So let's start our logic by adding a way to examine the next column. So how would we get a hold of the next column? So we know as this for each loop begins, this is going to be the index. This will be index 0. This will be the first item. If you remember from our alphabet array we just made in the browser, this would be A. So we need B. We need the next item in there. And so to get that, we're just going to assign something that makes sense. We'll say the next column. And we'll say, okay, well, we have to go into the column array, because the column array is really just the row array. And we're going to say column array. And if you remember, how do we get an item from an array? Just like in the browser, we have array brackets next to the array, and now we spell out the index. And the index of the next column is always going to be the column index. So this would be, for the first item, this is going to be 0. That would be the current column here. We need the next one. So we're going to say, if we're at 0, then we want column index plus 1. So this is always going to be the next column in the array. But what happens when we get to the end of the array? So the end of the array would be, if it's an array that has 5 items, the last index would be number 4. And let's say we said 4 plus 1, that's column index 5. This isn't going to break anything, but next column is going to be, it's going to look for it and it's going to say, hey, I didn't find anything, and it's going to return the value undefined. So we need to protect our logic to only apply when there is a column, a next column. So let's give a little spacer here, and we're going to start an if statement, and we're going to say next column, capital C there, and we're going to use, and this is how we read it too, we read it as not equal to, and we're going to use what's called the bang equals. So before we were doing, hey, if this is equal, but now we're saying not equal. And so if you're not equal to undefined, great. Let's do the curly braces and open it up. If it's not equal to defined, then you are indeed a column of the array. So the next step we're going to look at is we need to randomly choose if we will add a wall. So let's use our random generator here. So we're inside of the if statement that we have here, and we're going to do a const, and we're going to say add wall, and it's going to equal the randomize function we have below that we created, and we're just going to pass in an array. So there's an array, and what's the values that we want to put in here? Well, for now, we're just going to put true and false. If we wanted to weight the values and create, let's say, more right walls, we could say true, false, true, 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 and that gives a heavy weight to true because it's randomly going to select true more likely. In this case, we're going to get kind of like a 50-50. Close to it anyways, as 50-50 as we need. So we're just going to leave it true and false for now, semicolon to end doing that. And if we recall, the algorithm stated that if the current column set number and the next column set number matched, then we must add a right wall. So getting each column set number may be a bit wordy for our logic. So if you remember, we were storing it using the set attribute and the data set property that we made up in the last video. So let's create 2 variables to hold these values for us. So again, we're in the if loop now, and we know if we're going to add a wall or not, because that's going to be true or false. And then the next 2 things we want is we want the current set number, and we'll just keep it short and say current set is equal to the current set. That means the current column, the column we're talking about here. And we're just going to say get attribute, and you remember we called that data set, so it has to be data hyphen something, and we already specified it's going to be set. So this is going to get that value, and it's going to say, great, we have a value. Now every row is going to have a value. It's going to have something in there. And then we also need to evaluate the next one. So let's just copy paste that down there, and we'll just say this one is the next set. But how do we get the next set data set? Well, it's not column, it's the next column that we specified up here. So we know if this is undefined, it'll never get to this. So we'll never try and attempt to put a right wall at the end of the array. So Now we break into this if loop. We're going to get the current one from the current column, and we're going to get the next one by specifying our column index +1. So this gets us everything we need for the logic that we reviewed earlier. So let's create the first check. So we wanted to do, now that we need to be in the if loop that we have, because we never want to do next column where it's undefined. We're going to create another if statement here, and we're going to say, what's the first thing we need to do? Okay, well, are we going to add a wall? Well, let's ask if add wall. So if that's true, we're going to add a wall. So let's just break into that, enter curly braces, open it up, and we're going to say, what are we doing? We're going to add onto the column, the current column. We're going to add, this is an HTML element, so we can add a style, and that style is going to be border right. And what we'll do here is we'll say the border right is equal to 1px solid black, and a semicolon at the end. So now we know if this is true, we're going to add a wall. But that wasn't the only requirement we had. If we recall, it was also if the set numbers match. So we can piggyback right here and just say after add wall, and we can do an or. So if this is true, do this. If it's false, it's going to move to the second one to see if that one's true. If this one's not true, so it's this one or this one. And this one, I'm just going to open up some parentheses because I got a couple things to put in here. And we're going to say if the current set is equal to the next set. So again, the rules were if we randomly decide to add a wall or if the set numbers match. So add wall or set numbers match, border right 1px solid black. Our second check is if our randomizer chooses not to add a wall. And remember, if we don't add a wall, it was saying to union the set numbers together. So we can just go down here and we're going to open that up and say else, and we'll open up the curly braces. So it was either this or this, and this is how we can do that with if or else, this or this. And else is going to be, we have to take the next column and we have to change, so we're going to set the attribute, not just get it, and it's currently living in the data set property that we created, and we need to give it the current set. And then we're just going to have a semicolon here. Once again, we're going to loop through and we're going to say next column, column array, give me the next column. If that's not undefined, let's see if we're going to add a wall, randomly choose true or false, and then also get the current and the next set numbers by using the get attribute. And then if add wall is true, fine, border right, end. If that's not true, then check for this. The current set equals the next set. If that's true, add a wall. If none of these are true, we're going to go on to else, which is next column set attribute data set to the current set. All right, that should be it for our right wall logic. Now, let's complete our for each loop by adding a way for us to visualize the changes that we're making. So we're just going to come in here and say, okay, look, we got this for each loop, we got this if statements here, and we're going to go right down here and we're going to say column inner HTML equals the column, and we're just going to get the attribute that we set, data set. And we were doing this earlier, if you recall, in the create row function. So let's go back down to the create row section because now we're overwriting this value. We want to see the most up-to-date value. So I'm just going to come down here, and remember we were creating the initial set number here, and we're just going to get rid of that. So let's see, we have our set number, and let's just get rid of that line, get rid of that line. So we just got rid of the blank line as well. And now we can save our work. So let's go ahead and do that. We did already instinctively saved it. And let's load the view HTML in the browser. So we'll go here, open up our browser, file, open file, projects maze, there it is, view HTML, and let's open it up. Okay, all right, we have some inner walls here. So by adding the borders, adding the borders has created a bit of a mess of our lines because now they don't add up. Now that's because the browser does not compute the border width within the given width of the cell. So in the developer console, let's just open that up to the right and select a cell whose border is a bit too large. So where are we at here? We're going to go here, this one. This one's the last one pushing over there. And let's see, we can see here that we did set all of them to width 30px. And you can see here we have a 30 by 30 cube. So here's our height and width. You can see we have 30 by 30. And we set the border. So we can see here, this is what all this is. There's a margin. This is the border. This is padding. It even says right here. So our border on the right side is 1. So this is 31. So some of these cells, if they don't select a value, is just 30. There's no 1. So you can see eventually they're going to start getting pushed over. And so all we can do to do something to mitigate that is we can come in here. Let's find that one that we had before. Is it this one? And I think that was the one, if that's right. And let's go over here and just add another property that says, that tells a CSS property that tells the browser, hey, consider in its box sizing, let's consider the border with the width. So now we're going to do border box. I don't know if you saw that quickly, but right down here we saw the width changed to 29 plus 1 is now 30. So let's get rid of that. You can kind of see that moving a little bit right here. So if we add that to each one of these divs, we're going to get a good computation here. It's going to render it correctly. So we need to fix that, and we can do that in the column loop. So let's go back to our code.js file, and it should be down here somewhere in our create loop, and we're going to do it right here where we're setting styles. So we have a style here, and I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to say column div style, and this is where we're going to say just what we did before, box sizing, and that's going to equal the string border box with a semicolon at the end. So let's go ahead and save our work, and let's go back to the browser, and we're going to refresh our browser. And okay, everything's lining up, and let's just hit the random key here and just kind of look around. Yeah, it's definitely randomly selecting right walls, and you know, good enough for where we're at today. So nice job, everyone. Our maze is really shaping up. In the next video, we'll add the logic that adds the bottom rows. So if you enjoyed this video, click like and then subscribe buttons to get notifications of new content. Thank you for exploring programming with me, and I'll see you in the next video.